Nice.
Hello, RP people, and welcome back to another episode of Role Playing as Smart People, the podcast where we pretend to know what we're talking about when it comes to all things tabletop. My name is Santa, and thanks for tuning in again. Joining me today, we got Scott, who's probably bottom right here, and we have Finder, who's on the side over here. And if you're listening to this on on podcasts, for the first time ever, we are actually on YouTube video. Us people, we are real people, and this will be a good way in the future to tell if other Scott is actually another Scott or if it's just an actor.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fair enough. No, I wouldn't argue. No, I would argue with myself like that. Yeah, I would. To be
You
fair.
would. You would. You would.
I would. I would.
Yep. So
Oh,
if
man.
things are the light's not right or anything like that, we're working on it. Hopefully getting some green screens, but this is kind of like our little pilot. So give us criticism, guys. We need it a lot. But on
About
today's
the content.
about the content, yeah, we already know we're horrible
Yeah.
people. Don't worry. So on tonight's episode, we're going to have a discussion about the difference between tabletop RPGs and story games, which I really didn't know too much about story games or what they are, but I've had to do a little research. What, in your guys' opinion, what is the difference between an RPG and a story game?
You want to go first, Scott, or do you want me to?
No, you brought this up, so.
Well, I didn't bring it. I brought it up from a conversation that we'd started having a while back when Santa was talking about solo games, and I'd made the comment that a GM-less solo game is not a TTRPG, and that got me thinking about, okay, what would I consider a true RPG? And when I say RPG, I'm talking TTRPG because I don't consider video game RPGs either. So for me, things like a GM-less solo game is not a TTRPG. I don't consider choose your own adventure books TTRPGs. Those are story games. That's why I consider the GM-less solo game. That's more of like a choose your own adventure. Even if it's being made up on the fly, that is you playing with yourself, pun intended, coming up with something. You're writing your own choose your own adventure story, basically. And so other games that I would consider things like story games could be Pandemic, that sort of stuff.
Sure.
Frost, what is it? Not Frosthaven, but what's the other?
Frostgrave?
Is it Stonegrave? I've got the game in my closet. I can't remember. But yeah, it's one of those. It's like Frostgrave. I think is the new version of that, right? There was one before that. Gloomhaven. Sorry,
Gloomhaven.
Gloomhaven.
Yeah.
Gloomhaven to me is a story game. It's not an RPG because even though you're in there and you have missions and things like that, it's a dungeon crawl type of thing. I don't consider it an RPG because you're not really playing your role. You're not coming up with your own character. You have these ones that you kind of have pre-assigned, that sort of stuff. So that to me is a story game allows us to create stories. It allows us to maybe alter the way that story comes out. But for me, an RPG requires social interaction of us taking on a role. So a GM-less game can be an RPG if it's more than just me, because then I have other people that are taking on their roles of characters, and I can't control those.
I got a question for you then. What about games that are story games but involve multiple people and potentially a GM?
Give me an example, because Pandemic involves multiple people, and that to me is a story game and not an RPG.
Well, what's that one done by David? Scott. God. Town called.
You talking about Bedlam Hall? Oh no, A Town Called Malice.
Yeah, Town Called
Yeah.
Malice. That one
Yeah.
is considered a story game. And it's, I would say, like, it's kind of almost narrows the line between it, but generally that one is, I guess, a GM-less one too, eh? Or it says to have a GM sometimes.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, you can have a GM when you do that. Yeah, Because so part of the storytelling stuff though is the much disproven GNS theory, which I say disproven, but there's still there are crumbs of truth to games can be easily divided into a game is game, a narrative style game, and then a simulationist game. That's people get pissy about it, but that is absolutely true. Yes, you can mix and match, but systems lean heavy in one direction or the other. So you look at Fate is considered a story game, right?
Yeah.
Dungeon, anything powered by the apocalypse is considered a story game. Um, what else? Dread, probably what 10 candles? Is 10 candles, right?
10 candles, yeah.
Yeah. So things like that are also considered in the story games.
Story game kind of genre.
Um,
So I
yeah.
guess maybe we need to come up with a solid definition because for me, I would still consider Powered by the Apocalypse. That to me is still an RPG, even though you said it was a
Mhm.
story game.
Yeah.
And I would still consider that an RPG.
I think it's because it's how it's written. That's if you read anything PBTA, they focus real heavy on, like almost within the first probably 10 pages or so. It's going to be the why are we here? Well, we're here to explore. What makes screaming battle axes the happiest things on earth, and this game helps us get to those tales. And I guess that's the perspective they write from. But you're not wrong because we played Dungeon World and I agree with you. I still think Dungeon World is a really great version of Dungeons and Dragons. I recant what I said last episode after Santa reminded me of DCC, but yeah, you're not wrong. I still do consider that a very much a role playing game, and you could do a lot with it. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, as far as like story, like I don't know, man, because I understand what you're saying about like Gloomhaven is chess with fireballs and swords, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Well, and it can be co-op, it can be non-co-op, but it's still a team-based game as well. Even in the
yeah.
non-co-op version, it's still a team-based game. You're not fighting each player, other than to maybe be the first to accomplish the objective of whatever that particular mission is.
So I found actually an article that kind of delves into this a little bit. It was done by the Alexandrian.net. Um,
Alexandria. Yep.
and they were actually trying to pretty much put a little bit of a definition. So with tabletop RPGs, it is considered a TTRPG if the player themselves, uh, their character is their main focus. So if anything, when it comes to advancing or anything like that, only focuses on that character itself, it is considered a tabletop RPG. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, uh, generally story RPGs or story games, uh, they are where progression of the character is either non existent or minimal, but the rules and mechanics also emphasize the players themselves creating the scenes as it goes about. So if there's mechanics built towards creating a story, like creating the world and the story, it is considered more of a story RPG. While if it focuses solely on the characters that the players are playing, it is then a tabletop RPG. And he even says it does get, like in the article, it does get fuzzy in between that stuff, where there's some that kind of teeter the line between both of those. But in general, it is either a game that focuses more on mechanics that push a story or mechanics that push more towards the characters, like progression. What do you think of that? Do you think that's kind of a valid way to look at it?
I mean, it's kind of what you're getting at, I think, right? Which
Yeah.
is like a dungeon world again, because it's just the easiest PBTA to really talk about without being disgusted by some of the nonsense. PBTA, the tagline for Power by the Apocalypse is always "You play to find out." Yes, but to Rich's point, to the point of the article, to find out, you have to make rolls, right? You have
Hmm.
to hack and slash. You have to. Oh man, my mind's going blank. But all of the moves you make and the moves based on the class, those facilitate the finding out. Yeah, you can say, well, no, this is the lair of the bullywugs, and they were driven out into the swamps from the underground portions by salamanders. Okay,
Hmm.
but how do you know that? Well, I had to spout lore, which means you had to make that roll. And so, but to Rich's point, like Gloomhaven and some of the other games, the Town Call Malice, the most important thing isn't your character at all. It's moving from scene to scene and narrowing it down
Yeah.
as to who the murderer is or the problem is, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, and Gloomhaven is what? To get to the end of the dungeon and everyone gets
Uh,
cards and treasure and all that
and
jazz,
you
right?
get
Yeah.
cards, loot, and all that stuff. And you keep going like you do have
Yeah,
pre-gen characters. That one, like I think
yeah.
that's I don't
See, according to
people.
that definition, though, according to that definition, Gloomhaven would be considered an RPG because the rules are around the advancement of that character. You get through the dungeon and you advance your character.
I
Oh,
think
okay.
that's considered a
All I know
board
is
game.
If I remember correctly, I've only played it once. So
It's a video game, and
I
I
will
haven't
caveat
launched it yet.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
I
so-
consider Gloomhaven a board game. I do not consider it an RPG. I think it has
Yes,
RPG
same.
elements,
I agree.
but is purely a board
Yeah.
game. Now, even in this article, you one of you guys actually mentioned Dread, and he even says he's like, I'm not too sure where to place this one because the lines are a little bit blurred with Dread, because there is a mechanic that really kind of builds the world, especially with pulling out pieces of Jenga, but at the same
Yeah.
time the players themselves are more focused on the character's actions more than what the world progresses.
I disagree with that. I've seen, I disagree with that. I've done Dread and I've seen it played a bunch of times, and no one is concerned about their character. They're concerned about toppling the stupid tower, right? And then ending their turn, which isn't really their character. It's the, oh, I've made the situation worse for everyone because now there's one less person to do the story. So that's a weird one for him to have written that on.
Well,
Let's go back to Gloomhaven for a second, though. When you're done,
sure.
when you're done finishing this comment, I want to go back to Gloomhaven.
Oh,
So
yeah,
finish
I
your
was
thoughts,
just
Santa.
yeah, I was just going to say the only thing is he actually says he's like he can't argue if someone says it's a role playing game, but he also can't argue if people say it's a story game because it is one of those games that kind of blur the line to a point where it's almost, if you wanted to put in either one of those categories, you would not be able to properly fit it. So that was just one thing that the article is just bringing up. That he does bring up Wushu, which I know that's one of your favorite games, Scott, and he says that's yeah, I know it's not. He actually said he's like that one is a pure story game because you build your character gets stronger and stronger as you describe more. He's like it's not there to be to level up your character to have this. It's literally just there for a story. And I was like, okay, makes sense. But back to Gloomhaven.
So, what makes Gloomhaven a board game and not an RPG? Let me ask you that. And the reason I'm asking is we play with dolls. So, what's the difference between us playing with dolls in an RPG and playing with dolls on Gloomhaven?
It comes in a box.
Well,
so
does
look
D&D,
behind
right?
Scott. Scott's got a bunch of boxes back there.
The original D&D came in a box, but no
Yeah.
dolls. So what's the difference between? I don't think there is one, but like, if we don't want to use, if we could continue with Gloomhaven, but Wrath of Ashardalon, it uses a modified 5th edition rule set, and it's a game where you open the box and you adventure in a randomized dungeon with Dungeons and Dragons characters, and they have little character cards, and it's the same thing as Gloomhaven, right? It's just WotC made it. I almost said TSR. WotC made it, and they did all their board games that way, but they do call them board games.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a good question. Is like, what is that defining line? Is it investment or is it the verisimilitude, right, of you and your character and the goals and your? Because in Gloomhaven, did you really give a shit if the character made it off? Because was the presence of the board and how it looks and how it plays, does it psychologically, I guess, just dampen your like role playing instincts?
To me, it does. In that I know that this is a game with a singular mission for this phase of it. Again, I've only played it once. I need to get back to it because it was a fun game. But there's very little role playing of that particular mini that you have, right? You may have some, hey, get over here and help me sort of interaction like you would in a TTRPG where you're trying to have team tactics of some sort and coordinate. But there's not necessarily a lot of interaction with NPCs other than to murder them.
Okay,
So that's why I don't consider Gloomhaven a TTRPG, but I would consider it a story game more than a board game, because all of the aspects of the board are no different than what I would have in a TTRPG either. In fact,
sure.
all of the assets were available so that you could create your own new scenario even. You don't have to follow just the scenarios that are in the book. You can come up with your own scenarios for that game.
So
Interesting.
here's just my thought process, and this might be a little bit I don't know if this would be a dead set for all board games or anything like that, but I think the way you can tell from what a board game is opposed to an RPG, a story game, is a board game is a self-contained product. When you buy Gloomhaven, everything you would possibly need comes in a singular box. You can read the rules and start playing. You don't need to come up with a story. And it's true though. Like, and I know you can say like, oh,
Well,
there's this and that,
the
but
starter
it does.
sets.
Starter sets for what games though?
D&D has a starter has like, well, I have 500 starter sets at this point, but
Yeah.
the starter sets they have the dungeon, they have dice, character sheets, the maps, they have everything you need, and you never actually need anything besides a starter set technically to play the game for a long time.
Correct.
Yeah, it doesn't
But-
have the core rules or anything like that though, right?
No, it has
Yeah,
the
it
core
does.
rules
Yep.
for the starter set. Yes. Now,
Yep.
are they a simplified version? Are they a
Yeah.
stripped down version? Yes. It's not the DMG. It's not the PHB. It's not the Monster Manual.
Yeah.
But it does have the rules for the combat. It has the rules for all of that sort of stuff that you would
Yeah.
need to immediately jump in and start playing.
Yeah. In fact, it's probably more playable 5e. But that's beside the point. But I get what you're saying. It's like, and to what Rich said is like, in Gloomhaven, there's in a board game like Wrath of Shardalon, Gloomhaven, you're not going to enter. Because I'm thinking about like Ruins of Undermountain, right? Which is technically a giant board game like Gloomhaven. You're going down, you're dungeon crawling, and you're doing the things, and you're just moving along the paths, and you're killing shit and all that jazz. But there are times in Undermountain or any other mega dungeon, any other dungeon period, where you can stop and parlay. That won't happen at Gloomhaven, right? There's, like you said, there's no interaction between you and any of the other creatures that are on the board.
Yeah. Not that I know of. I will say that there maybe there
Yeah.
are. I've only run the very first introductory scenario.
So by the book, though, in the rules, is
Yeah.
it ever discussed? Because like D&D discusses social skills. Every role playing game actually at some point has to address role playing. I don't think Gloomhaven ever does. I think Raph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it may. I don't know. I'm with you in that I assume that it does not cover that,
Yeah.
because I've never played. I mean, I've never read the full book. I was playing with somebody else, so they knew
Okay.
the rules.
So,
So
there was an article. It was an article written. I forgot what year. Santa can look it up if he's so inclined. But this will be a very fun statement. A lot of young folks haven't heard it. And by young, I mean you're new to the hobby. John Wick, not that John Wick who invented Seventh Sea and all that jazz. He had this really cool post that tells a lot of heat and a lot of whining. Chess is more of a role-playing game than Dungeons and Dragons. Because Dungeons and Dragons isn't a role-playing game. It's actually labeled as an adventure game. And it has been for a long time.
yeah,
I'm gonna
and
look that
an adventure
up.
game is where you, it's I forgot what you look for, but just John Wick, chess is a role playing game or something like that. But yeah, it's in the original, through all of D&D is you move your pieces and they just do their thing. And it's like his point was in chess. There's just more to chess than people give it credit for, and the actual tactics in chess matter than when you're moving your dolls around in D&D. Like we had a conversation on the chat or in the Discord server, right, about that. Like very few people use tactics. Very few people care about vision and encumbrance and all the other shit that gets in their way. But it's like, okay, but then you really are just playing chess at that point, and you're just we'll make some die rolls and let the randomizers figure out what happens, and I'll hit, and then Rich hits me, and then I swing at him. And he swings at me, I swing at him, and eventually someone goes to 0 hit points from 540 hit points, and we move to the next room. Did you find it?
I saw that the first edition does. I'm just looking at the second edition. I don't think says it, but it something I read recently, which might explain why the first edition said adventure game, because I think the term tabletop RPG came after more
Yeah.
games were coming out with tabletop games,
Yeah.
but they can't call it Dungeons and
Mhm.
Dragons because that's not
Yep.
that's the name of a game. So I think that was created after
Yeah.
first edition.
I'm not sure if Tunnels and Trolls said RPG. I haven't looked at Tunnels and Trolls in forever, but because that was really early on too as a direct
Yeah.
competition to D&D. But yeah, if anyone listening, go and find that article by John Wick because it was really good because he took a lot of flack for it. He defended it. He did a video I think on YouTube about it. But it's a really cool read. Do I believe it? I mean, I don't know. I don't
Yeah, I think I probably straddle that
know. Yeah.
line because
Yeah.
you can, like we've talked about before, we can see the war game roots
Yeah.
of Dungeons
Mm-hmm.
and Dragons.
Yeah.
It's grown beyond those,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's not just a war game any longer. It does allow you to take on your role. It does have interaction with NPCs, um, that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it as well. So I'd still
Yeah.
consider Dungeons and Dragons an RPG,
Oh yeah.
but I
That
think
is
there are
funny.
better RPGs.
Well, yes. That's a topic we cover.
Sorry,
a
the
lot.
Jared.
That's all right. We'll get into play Savage Worlds. It's yeah, I don't know. It's just weird. But story games are they can be very ephemeral. I'm trying
Yeah.
to think of any like story games that I've played. Because I don't even think Fate is when they come up with GNS theory over in the Forge. What a shithole. I get. It was a time when the hipsters, again, if you haven't watched Zero Charisma, go watch Zero Charisma. It came out right about the time that all the hipsters were invading the hobby and
Mhm.
trying to have their, mocha chai cappuccinos fucking versions of role playing games. And so I should probably not swear if we're gonna be on YouTube. And but they did this GNS theory. They wanted to neatly divide these games, and that's where you get into trouble. And I'm like, Fate's really a really good role playing game because you're literally playing a role and you're taking a
Mhm.
character. Like, well, that's the story part of it. Nah, it's more narrativist, I would say. But and even then, Fate still has very not complicated, but it has a complex resolution mechanic. You have to roll those 4 dice, and it's a plus, a negative, or it's a nothing, but you're still using modifiers to that, and so you're still looking at things, and it's like, okay, well, and that is even more complex for gamers. Is like, okay, well, I have I don't know, super agility, and I roll my dice, and I have 2 pluses, a minus, and a neutral. What does that mean, right? In most games, it's like, hey, I rolled this number, and it's better. It's that number or better, that number or the less, and so it's very easy. But
Yeah.
with Fate and the Fudge system, it's like that. You have to it's very interpretive. Because then you get to determine what happens.
And there's also even mechanics set in place for you to change the scene of the world
Yeah,
itself. You can add in things, you can
yeah,
remove things, you can do
yeah,
quite a bit, and
yeah,
it does also fit the definition of having little to. And in fact, that game has no character progress towards getting more powerful, change like abilities. It's all based off of literally just like, oh, what's your character? Well, I'm a hardened cop. Okay, that's part of your thing. Okay, what's your personality? What what do you have any signature stuff that you do? And it doesn't even have to be items. And you build all that.
yeah.
And like if you put you're an Amazonian woman with a spear made out of gold that can pierce the heart of the evil. I'm just throwing this one out there.
Yeah,
Those
yeah,
now
yeah.
become elements in the game. So
Yeah, there's your
Fate
aspects. Yeah,
yeah, and that all changes the narrative and it changes the world around. I would actually say that Fate's actually a really good example of a story game that's almost that has been masquerading as an RPG.
I like it.
So I wonder if there's a different level here, and where I'm going with this is narrative. I like Scott's use of the word narrativist rather than whatever it is that we were talking about, like a story game. And the reason I say that is if D&D If the whole thing is around telling a story, and that's what makes a story game, I would argue that most people expect Dungeons and Dragons to be a story game now, because we
Sure.
go into this looking for character progression, whether that's in the form of gaining levels or resolving a character arc. It doesn't matter. You look at Critical Role, and that is a story that Matt Mercer is telling collaboratively with his players.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us, I think, go into a game trying to tell some sort of story, unless we're doing like a West Marches style campaign. But most of us have something in mind. The overarching campaigns, like
Yeah.
the Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen, or whatever it is, that's got a story behind it.
Yep.
Most of them are now storyist in that regard, but there are certain games that are more narrativist. I would argue that Fate is probably more of a role-playing game because the GM comes up with the story, right? If it's what I'm imagining, I've never played Fate, but there's no difference between Scott coming up with a story, running that character through, playing, taking on the roles of NPCs, the characters interacting with NPCs in that regard. Whether the character progression has defined rules, and I would argue that Fate might have that, because as I say this is part of my character now, it becomes part of that. Your characters are going to grow based on the way that story is going.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to introduce new elements to that, which to me is character progression.
Mm-hmm.
So
because your character's not going to remain static.
I think story game is that's that you actually just kind of like made a little light bulb for me. If I have the technology, you'll see a light bulb right there. But what if instead of using the term story, because that is it almost makes it sound like it's a completely different genre, and I don't think it is. But we have a tabletop role playing game, which tends to facilitate. Okay, well, you have these miniatures, you have this. You have your paper that you always see in front of you. What if instead of just tabletop RPG, what if we have also narrative RPGs? That way, you can actually kind of associate them as similar with small different variations between them.
You're traveling back in time. Have you ever read GNS Theory?
I remember you sent it to me once, and I read it, then I totally forgot about it.
Yeah, it's a good read because it talks about the stuff that you just talked about. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's theater of the mind. It's there's a lot to disagree with the GNS theory. There's a lot that makes sense, but people let their own personal biases on both sides of the argument get in the way of having an actual conversation. That's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. No, that's
just how that shit was going on in 2008. So 2022 is nothing new in 2023. None of this shit is new. It's just how it always is.
And I think part of my thought processes on why this is important is I get frustrated when somebody says they've played RPGs and they say video games. Same thing with solo RPGs that are GM-less. That to me is not a game at that point. A game to me, when we're talking RPG games, requires social interaction at some level with somebody outside of yourself. If I am if I'm doing a GM-less game, even if I'm coming up with that story on the fly myself, I'm the GM, I'm the characters, I'm the NPCs. I'm trying to write a book. That's all I'm doing at that point, right? That's the way that I see that.
I mean, really, yeah. You could turn
and so
book, yeah.
TTRPGs can be broken down into tactical RPGs, narrative RPGs, or whatever, but those are still RPGs as long as you have one or like at least two or more people involved. Like if I'm doing a solo game, I'm the GM and Scott's the player. That's still an RPG. Mm-hmm. That's still to me an RPG. But it's when you get into this, well, I'm gonna play a solo RPG. No, you're not. You're gonna choose your own adventure book, or you're going to start writing your own story and you're talking with yourself, and that's okay. That's totally cool. I do that myself. I've got my degree in creative writing, so I understand that. But it's not playing a game at that point. That to me is coming up with something to entertain myself, but it's not a game. That was my big rant. So
Sure. Well, that's how I test a lot of stuff that I write. Is I'll have
yeah,
to because I don't have access to just players at a whim, and so yeah, you got to put stuff down, but it's very very sterile,
yeah.
you know, because it's yeah. I guess there's more investment in how all this works versus the conversation. Yeah, no. Now I'm thinking about it. I was like, yeah, I don't know, man. It's a cool topic because it really is. It blends in so many places, and it's like D&D Fifth Edition. I know people will break out their books. I'm trying to look at my shelf. I packed almost everything away or sold it.
Yep.
I know it addresses our role playing now. Fourth edition did too, but I mean, regardless of all of those things, you look at conflict management, and not like the HR term for it, but like combat. Like what 87-90% of D&D is written around the fight,
Mhm.
Yep.
spells, everything, skills. They talk about,
All
Savage Worlds is
feats.
just, yeah, all feats. I mean, Savage Worlds is just as guilty of this. It has some cool stuff, but when you look at the book, you're like, the combat options are just very telling. Like, oh, this is a game about beating the dog piss out of
Yeah.
people, and that's what you're gonna
It
do.
is,
Yeah,
but it also does go into social. I mean, there are social skill or
yeah,
social edges. There are
yeah. That's
leadership
the handout.
edges. There's social conflict resolution. There's
Yeah, there's a lot of
dramatic
social.
tasks.
Yeah, yeah,
So
sure.
there's non-combat stuff in there more so than in D&D. D&D is
Yeah,
all combat focused.
yeah, 100%. There's a lot of social edges in Savage Worlds, which is surprising
Yeah,
how much thought they put into that aspect of the
yeah.
game. That and the social conflict system is really cool.
So
Now I
here,
will say though the great. Oh, go ahead, Santa.
oh no, I was going to ask a question of you guys, but
No, go
if you
ahead.
got something to add to it first.
I was just going to say that the thing about D&D is I think people expand beyond that without realizing. It's like even we've talked about people that say, "Well, I'm running the game raw, right? Rules as written," and no, you're not,
No.
because people expand that into the interactions, the puzzles, all that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
I think back to when I was a kid and Tracy Hickman. Big name in the D&D world back then, and still is with like Dragonlance and all that sort of stuff. He talked about how he would run his youth group from church. He'd have them play Dungeons and Dragons for what it was teaching the kids, which was how to cooperate with one
Yeah.
another, how to do teamwork and all that sort of stuff. And it wasn't just combat at that point. There were other things that he was having to do to help them with that, with like the puzzles and all that sort of stuff. But that's not to say that a combat focused game can't have or can't grow beyond those roots. But I still feel that like we said, D&D is a more combat focused game than many of the other games out there.
Would it be safe to say that um, story games and focus more on not only narrative but more on social interactions within the game, opposed to tabletop RPGs that tend to have a more focused attention towards combat? Would that be a fair assessment? Ooh, making you guys think.
I don't. I still think we need to have a different. I think we need to have new terms, because most of your RPGs now are story focused. And when you look at Matt Mercer running D&D,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
are several sessions where you can go an entire 4 hours and not have a single combat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
So I think we need to have different terms now. I think story RPGs or story games. There's I think we've outgrown those labels to where there needs to be something new perhaps to describe things, because your TTRPGs are story games now.
Yeah, and that's why I think narrative or narrativist might work better,
Yeah.
right? Because it kind of goes to what you said, Santa, is the focus is on the narration versus the resolution system. Because like a town called Malice, you have resolution, but it's so vastly different than what you're used to in most role playing
Mm-hmm.
games. Dread, Ten Candles. Damn, I'm trying to think of some of the ones that claim to be Fiasco. as a resolution mechanic, but the fiasco, the narrative is more important. It's more important of the, I guess, the why or the how you get to the end versus the mechanics of the game and how well you obeyed them, and if you threw dice or not, you had combat or not, or how many spell slots you have. Yeah, I don't. Maybe a narrativist works better, but I don't know. But you're not wrong. Yeah, there's a different term that needs to be brought up and then
put in place for it. Because
yeah,
even like this. Oh, go ahead.
No, go. Yeah,
I was gonna say even like calling it a story game. It almost sounds like slightly demeaning in a way.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
you hear
little bit.
tabletop RPG,
But,
you hear all those things, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Rich is correct. And like, there's a lot of dudes in the OSR, and that's, I had my roots writing for the OSR way before I really started doing anything for Savage Worlds, and that was a big thing, right? And you see it a lot on the videos, like, we're gonna run OSR, we're gonna do rules written, but then they start telling a story to each other, and they start interacting and role playing, and I'm like, dude, I can open up that fucking 40-page book, and there are no rules on what you're doing. So you're having a natural gravitation to human interaction, conversing, and making things just out of nothing. And you create these things whole cloth out of your imaginations. There are no governing principles for that. There's no skills at all in OSR games unless they're more neo OSR. But yeah, you just don't have that. So it's like, well, what are we doing? Okay, we're going to converse. All right, well, I'm going to do this. And like, charisma didn't affect anything in the old days except for how many henchmen you could have and what their morale bonuses were going to be when you're in a fight and you're getting the shit kicked out of you. So, and then charisma changed with first edition, and then they added comeliness, which is so stupid, because everyone wants to be pretty.
Except Santa, he's always wanting to take the ugly edge.
Right.
I do.
Or hindrance, rather.
But yeah, they put a pin in the brawny edge. If there's an edge that irritates the piss out of me right now in Savage Worlds, it's the brawny edge.
Brawny?
Oh, brawny. Just
I'm glad I've been pissing you off with my past couple of characters.
I am about to ban the dog piss out of that edge in every game I run. Every single one of them is it's about to go away. It's about to go away.
So what is brawny for those who may not know?
Go ahead.
It gives you a +1 to your size. It gives you a +1 to your toughness, and that's mostly about it. It requires a D6 strength.
Yes, but it's the toughness that everyone wants, not the size. The size increases. I'm trying to swear because I want to stay on YouTube and have a successful time with this.
We've been good.
The size increase is dumb. It really is dumb because a size 1 increase in Savage Worlds is important. It really is. And so you look at some of the like, there's nothing to stop a Kender from, or a halfling or whatever, a half folk from taking brawny to bring that size from a -1 to a 0. But it's stupid. It's just the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. And it's like, and it's not you guys at all. Like in the games, it's everyone takes brawny, and it's just like, you only want the toughness. So I'm about to get rid of brawny and just write an edge and be like, pick me, I want toughness. And then we'll call it good. They'll have the same
well, and technically they could just by increasing their vigor by a die type.
Yeah. They want, everyone wants to win. We're getting off topic. Everybody wants to win. And they want this West Marches game. This West Marches game is starting to drive me. To quote Charlie from Always Sunny, I'm up to here right now. I don't want to get any higher. Oh man! But yeah, so I don't know what we talk about. D&D is less important than chess. What I believe it is. I role play better, and I role play more in chess than I do Dungeons and Dragons. That's not true anymore at all.
No,
not remotely true anymore. He wrote that. To be fair, he wrote that during 4th edition. But again, and we can have this conversation at some point. The maligning of 4th edition, and I was just as guilty of it because I didn't get it. And I'm shocked that a game designer didn't have a get it factor at that time. I think he was jumping on a bandwagon of shitting all over Wizards. And it's unfortunate.
Well, I do think that the Jared on the Discord server had a good point, and that is people it no longer felt like Dungeons and Dragons. And that's
Yeah.
why there was so much backlash from the Dungeons and Dragons community, because
Yep.
it wasn't their game anymore. It was
Right.
something else. And
But
I thought that was an insightful point, because I'd never picked up on that before.
so neither one of you've ever played fourth edition, or have you?
Nope, I have
Nope, I
not.
have not even
Okay,
looked at it.
so he's not wrong in that it plays more like, again, I said that 4E plays like Savage Worlds, because you have a fighter, right? Say, and I have, I don't know, like bully strike. I'm just making it up, and it's my encounter power, and I get to use it once per encounter. But when I hit you with it, it's I don't attack your. Not everything in 4E attacked an armor class. So like bully strike may be my weapon and my attack bonus against your fortitude save. And if I make it, then I push you back 2 squares. And so that's where it got weird for people, is because it felt like everyone had magic, but it's not against anyone. I had the same problem, because I walked away from a 4E game from a lot of longtime friends. It's the lack of the ability to imaginate what was happening into an adventure movie. And if they could have explained that better, it would have been so much cooler. Because like, oh, I take my sword on the barbarian and I hit your ass with that flat of the blade, bully strike, boom, and I hit you so hard it makes you back up and reel from the damage and the impact. But no one ever played it like that, because they just read the stupid cards and then they're like, oh, my video game encounter turn is over. And that's the unfortunate piece. So he's not wrong. It did feel that way. And again, I was just guilty of that. And now I regret it, looking back at everything. I'm like, this is probably the coolest version of D&D. Honestly, that's straight D&D. Just seeing how it plays out and the things it gave us. And we opened its mouth and just pooped all in it.
Well, what do they say about hindsight being 2020?
Yeah, 100%. 100%, because now we've got this dumb game. It was just so cool. I have
changed.
If you ever want to run us through a 4E game, I'll play a 4E game.
I do. If anyone knows how to take we'll talk about this offline. I have a file that I don't know how to take the file and turn it into JSON to be able to pull that data into Foundry or Roll20 or anything. So it would have to be like, you guys have your character sheets and you just in your cards, which I have all that stuff for you, completely legal. And you just we have to roll dice and just carry it out that way. And maybe we could use the board, the map, and that way with the tokens and stuff, and you make all your moves, and then we could just do the little sliding stuff. But automating it, and it doesn't mean automated. But no shit, there are monsters. Like Orcus had like, I don't know, 900 hit points or something. I wish I was kidding.
Well, so when you say Orcus, like the demon Orcus, right?
Yeah, like the demon prince Orcus, yeah. But there are monsters who, I just looked up one the other day and I was like, oh, what does this creature do? It's like 546 hit points. Because you see the bloodied is halfway through, and I was like, how is bloodied like 300, whatever, 323? My math. And I was like, that's a lot. I was like, oh, it has 500 hit points. But and even the difficulty checks in 4, you were like, a 45. So it tells you about the math. The math was just no, which is why 5e went the way it went, with like, nah, son, we're gonna bounded accuracy and it's gonna work. Yeah.
Nice.
So I'm sorry. I could talk about 4e. I'm just having this real retrospect on 4e lately. I have all my books out.
Yeah, see, I never bought a single. Heck, I never even bought a 3.5 book. Well, I never got to 3.5. After 3E, we switched everything over to Savage Worlds.
Yeah, that's kind of where I went to. I was so disappointed once 3rd edition. Like, it started out pure. Like, I think raw 3E, just the 3 books, is a cool system. But then everybody had to do what they're doing with 5E. Now there's like, oh, I want this character class and I need these feats. I'm just like, Jesus, what? Just use what's in the book, man. It's written to where it's balanced, and everything else that's coming after it is just to appease the little monsters. But I don't know. But still, if you ever want the best book on advising you as a dungeon master or a game master, the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide 2 is probably one of the best books written, because it's written by Robin Laws, and it walks you through every aspect of being a good GM. It's crazy good.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's worth the money if you can get a hard copy or
Said
PDF.
DMG2.
Yeah, the DMG2. Yeah, it's just such a solid guide for how to run a game. And it's fourth edition, but everything in there is obviously written from his perspective of, here's how you run a game in 4E. It has some other people, but they're not as important as Robin Laws and how he his vision of things. Kind of like Ken Hite with his vision of how stories get created. You know, I hold him on a pretty high pedestal of inventiveness.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
but that's the thing. So here, okay, back to the topic. Gumshoe. You guys ever played Gumshoe?
I have not.
I've
Okay.
read
I've heard of it.
through-
I've never played it though.
So Gumshoe has skills, but because the conceit is that no one wants to play Call of Cthulhu and miss all the clues, right? So that shit happens. Gumshoe allows you to essentially burn your resources, your dice pools, and all that. What dice pools? But your resolution mechanic, I don't know, packages. It allows you to burn those in order to get clues. And it also says, hey, if it's a clue they need, don't be stupid. Like don't put a locked door in the middle of the dungeon and be like, well, you couldn't pick it. I guess that's the end of the dungeon. Now, to be fair, that's going to happen in West Marches because it's supposed to happen. But if you're doing a campaign, you don't want to do stuff like that. So, but Gumshoe is because of that mechanic, and it's in every game that they touch, every genre of game because they will use the Gumshoe system. That is one of those that kind of straddles the line for me as well. It's because it's like, well, the resolution said no. Go to Savage Worlds. The resolution said no. Yeah, but I'm going to go ahead and burn this, and we'll go ahead and do it. I'm going to take a pen, make it hard for me to do it next time, and harder and harder. So it's a give and take, but it kind of no different than Benny's, I guess. Really, it may be harsher than Benny's because you're actually punishing yourself. See, I don't know, but Gumshoe's another one that has a really interesting line where it's gamist, but it also wants to have that narrative tie to it to just get on with it.
Along those lines, I think the more modern RPGs are moving in that direction. And I say that because I see a lot more of this. And it's a concept I've picked up and I'm incorporating even in Savage Worlds. And that is the failing forward.
Yes.
That a failure doesn't necessarily mean that you failed. It just means that there's something negative that's happening. So to your point, if there's something that is needed for this story to continue and they fail their check to pick that door, okay, you failed, you pick the lock, but your lock picks are broken in the process. Or you picked the lock and triggered a trap that you didn't find before. Yeah, sure. There are things that you can do to allow them to get through that, even though they technically failed the roll. Yep. And I'm finding that, and you may have noticed this even in the Dragonlance game, where I'm trying to come up with ways that a critical failure, the crit fail that I had on the last game, I'm sitting there trying to destroy this thing. I crit fail my spell casting roll. And what happens? We have dynamic backlash, and that dynamic backlash is going to, the spell turns on me and does 2d6 points of damage. And whether or not this is how it is in the game, only Scott knows because he's the GM. But in my head canon for that character, he did the spell correctly. There was some sort of anti-magic shell going on that turned my spell against me. And that's how my character envisions it. That's how I, as a player, envision it. And whether my vision is wrong or right, we can find out later, maybe, or maybe we never find out. Scott knows that, yeah, dude, you said the wrong syllable in the wrong spot, and it screwed up. But I'm finding that even when I'm GMing with my kids and things like that, I'm trying to make crit fails, not necessarily that the character did something horrible or just screwed up, unless that makes it a little bit more funny. I'm finding that the whole concept of the fail forward is a lot more alluring to me now, and I'm trying to incorporate it in more games than like Coriolis, which is where I came across it.
Is it now? Dungeon World.
Oh, there is that one. But to be fair, I played Forbidden Lands before I played Dungeon World.
Well, so. I can tell you which one was written first.
Well, kind of.
But no. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. You first.
No, go ahead. Nas is beeping. But it and there are people who will flip out about this very topic, right? And be like, well, no, that's not what the rules say. It'd be like, oh my god, what do you care? But like for your character, and I even told you, if that's like I want to explore what your character said, right? It
Yeah.
happened. Because I do know that well, there's a reason I told you what was on the overhead anyway. And but it's just there are people who flat out are these purists of like a failure is a failure. Let's just move forward. But they're also those are the same kind of people who are like, well, I want to know how many resources and cords of firewood we go through in a travel day. I'm like, it doesn't matter, dude. It just doesn't matter. Jesus wept. It doesn't matter. You also have never been out in the wild. It looks like so. I don't think you have a, you know,
Well,
Jesus Christ.
kind of
Was it my pasty white skin that gave it away that I've never
No,
been
not
out in
you.
the
It's just,
wild?
there are people I can look at and be like, I don't need you to advise me on the wilderness. Multiple SEER schools have done that for me. I'm very well acquainted with how hungry you can possibly get and how cold you can get, and snuggling up against another dude is just what's going to happen when you're freezing to death in a high desert, or in the mountains of Vermont and into Maine. So it just doesn't matter. It's crazy. Yeah, I don't like taking advice from people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Well, one thing I kind of wanted to say, because it's on the topic of story games, and I think there's a lot of games out there that we don't realize are story games that actually are. And a perfect example of this is I recently got the book from Rowan Rook and Deckard, Heart. And I was like, oh, this is a cool RPG. I'm reading it and everything like that. And then further down the book, they actually say is like, this is how you run a story game. And I was like, wait, what? And so I started looking through, and usually at the beginning it says this is how you play an RPG game. They do. I have to look through it more, but I don't think they ever once call it a tabletop RPG. I don't think they call it an RPG.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it did not even click to me that I was reading something that was more considered a story game, because you do have a character and you gain abilities for that, but the whole entire time they start discussing and pushing, this is a narrative game. You're creating a story with everyone together with your characters. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, that's still an RPG.
Look at you.
The contrarian.
Give him. I mean,
Well-
they typed it, so it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People misuse words all the time.
No, it's not true at all.
Yeah.
So I would still say that it's an RPG, even though they may want to bill it as a story game. To me, I don't know. Maybe it's like within the world of literature.
Yeah.
You have your I believe the term they use is literati. Those who feel that if I'm writing science fiction, I'm somehow writing less. The true writing is fiction, or that genre. And I think there's a lot of RPG designers and maybe even players who like, well, I'm not an RPG. We're telling stories. It's this elevation.
Yes,
Whether
right.
they intended that way or not, that's how it comes across to me.
Yeah.
It's like
100%. You're right, and 100% they do mean it, because I can 100% name at least 3 companies right now who act that way, and they're bougie as all get out about it, and they do hold themselves to be better than thou, because they do consider D&D. Like, I give D&D shit, but maybe I will still play it, but I don't consider it low brow, and they do.
Yeah.
Oh.
But I see what you're saying, yeah. And I don't think these games are lowbrow at all. Maybe the players are lowbrow, but it's a different thing.
Well,
that is a different thing. I agree.
I think West Marches is just.
and we'll be doing an
I'm
episode
excited for
on
Tuesday.
West
I just
Marches
want
pretty
to see
soon.
how it goes.
We're gonna have
I'm
to.
excited for two. Oh, yeah.
We're gonna have to have a story time, definitely, about
Uh,
your adventures with the West March campaign.
it will be interesting because it's Rich, and like part of the reason I'm really excited about it is because it's him, and I know I can. It's a degree of trust because he's familiar,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
because the other two people, well, the one guy to be fair is fine. The one dude's been a pain in the ass, but he's new to, I think, everything, and so grain of salt. It's just he got started on my nerve when if you come on the splash screen and it says big giant titles that are clickable, it says character creation, setting common knowledge. You shouldn't then ask me, can I be X? You should already know that those answers are somewhere in those two documents, and they're not very long, right? So I'm curious to see how it pans out, also because of how things happen, and we'll save it for the West March episode. But I'm curious here to get Rich's feedback on it because it'll be brutally honest, and then just to see what insight I've really gained from this because it's a very different thing to run, especially on a virtual tabletop. But I think I've got enough tricks down. Thank God for virtual tabletops nowadays in this era. Because I was real nervous about some of the concepts, and then I just stopped being dumb, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be so easy. So yeah, but I don't know, man. But there are people who do consider some of these games to be very lowbrow. Like I was watching a video this morning when I was typing some stuff, and the one guy's like, "Oh, I really like Savage Worlds," and one of the panelists is like, and then he's like, "I like Palladium." I was like, "Shit, mate, you have picked the second shit system that I can't stand." Oh boy, you talk about a nonsense system that should have died a long time ago, like GURPS, but it still clings on because of Grognards. Holy God. The Rifts should be thankful to Peg every moment of their day for Rifts for Savage Worlds. But it's the attitude. But then the attitude is from the same people like that are like, well, if it was further on in the thing, I made comments on it. I can't help myself because like, well, I don't play Savage Worlds, I just play Pinnacle. I was like, bro. And people are like, well, maybe he doesn't know. No, I know he doesn't know, and that's the frustrating part because you tout yourself to be some kind of mouthpiece, right, for things and logic and truth, and it's just like you don't know what you're talking about. You are so like I do. I gave Jared a really hard time about 5e, but he and I were eventually talking. And he's like, look, I get you have a lot of experience, and even Santa said that he's like you do have a lot of experience, so it's kind of incomprehensible sometimes where it's like, yeah, I've done this for like Rich and I played for Jesus Christ, we're old men now, and I've been doing this since I was 10 years old. Yeah, that's 40 years of this nonsense, and I played a lot of games. The games I talk shit about, I also played. I played Rifts. I ran Rifts. I ran Palladium Fantasy. I ran Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Still got to play Smart for that, even as ridiculous a system it is, and it takes 5 hours to make one character. But so I may run my mouth, but you can guarantee I've at least done the games, right? And so there's that. And I don't look down on any game. Well, I'll break games balls because they're not what I want. And we talked about this before. There are game systems that let me. And I don't want to say Santa accused me of this, but I forgot what he said. But he was. It was talk about all these systems. It's like you are definitely more of a narrative style person when I run a game, and that's why I probably gel with Savage Worlds best because it's that medium ground for me. There's no other game that lets me do what I do. Not even D&D 5e doesn't let me do what I do because I get bored with the combat. Yeah. At least Savage Worlds combat is fun and it's always fluid. There's always something new going on. But yeah, I don't ever look down I've never really looked down on another game down my nose. Right? Have you guys at all?
Have I ever looked at a game and said,
I will say that I probably look. I look down my nose probably at video game RPGs.
Yeah, when
somebody says I play RPGs.
I'm talking about tabletop. Because there's Solastro would be fun with you two dummies because it's Solastro is basically the best version of 5th edition you can play, and it's on a computer and it's on Steam. It's a really really well done role playing game. It's turn based. Right, so I mean that would be fun because we would be BSing and we wouldn't be my elven mage. Good evening, sir. Would you like some ale? No, we wouldn't do that.
My God, it's online co-op. and it's on
It
sale
is
right
online
now.
co-op. That's why
And it's on
it's such a
sale.
good game. It's so worth the money. It's
All
worth. How
right.
much is it on sale?
17, well, Canadian, so remember it's probably like $2 for you, but it's $17 for me.
It might be. It might be. But it's a really good game. They skirted the line. I think Jared even mentioned that. He did mention Solastro, and I think most people were like, I don't know what he's talking about. But it's a really good version of 5th edition D&D. It's like the old school Baldur's Gate and all that jazz, but with the 5th edition rule set, with the SRD built into it. And it is co-op. But so no, besides
to answer your question, I don't think I've ever looked down my nose at another RPG. I may give something a pass. I may, to your point, I may talk crap about it. But even on Discord, I think when we were talking about that, I would rather somebody get into D&D than not get into RPGs at all. Because I think TTRPGs are very beneficial to society, especially people who need to learn social skills.
100%. And it's good. And it's like, that's how I got the one group I had here locally with all the doctor and the nurse and then the engineer. I met him. I ran him through 5th edition because that's what they wanted. And they're like, oh my God, this is a really cool game. You do this. This is awesome. So we played a few sessions here. We finished a little campaign. I was like, when we take a palette, I ran D&D as honest as I could, and they had a good time. But I was like, but I always do what I do. I'm like, hey, let's have a palate cleanser. Like, you guys interested in like science fiction or anything like that? They're like, yeah, sure. I'm like, oh, let's try the Savage Worlds, and I'll make up some characters for you. And we did a one shot. And then when I was like, what do you guys want to do next? The doctor, she was like, I don't know about you dipshits, but we're playing Savage Worlds. That was it. Nice. That was it. And they were critical role junkies. They consumed everything 5e that you possibly could. And then I did what I usually do.
And you're a good man for it.
I will recruit you away from boring, stale. Oh, is it a 16? It's my turn again. I've had to wait 5 hours. I cast magic missile. Next.
Speaking of that, though, the thing that's funny is I saw a YouTube video the other day about D&D 5e and this guy's rules for overland travel. And the way he describes it, I'm like, that's a freaking dramatic task in Savage Worlds. That's all you've done. You've taken dramatic tasks from Savage Worlds and put it into 5e. And there are some concepts. I mean, he came up with some concepts. And I'm like, that is cool. And that's something that I may want to use because he's like, yeah, they have to get so many successes on these skill rolls. And if they fail to get that, then there's a deadly encounter. And I'm like, that's kind of a cool idea. Because he's like, I want it to be the idea that overland travel is dangerous and it's not something to be undertaken lightly.
Well,
and I'm like, that's cool.
You're going to enjoy the West Marches game then. So
awesome.
But I kind of joked about it. But those are the kind of groups though I want to join and just throw a pretend hissy fit. Be like, you're not running 5th edition now. This has no bearing. Show me in the book where this is acceptable. Well, we got to create house rules. Yeah, I don't want house rules. I want 5th edition. Just to be an ass because the point is like, well, why would you do that? Well, because in Savage Worlds it literally says here's how you accomplish all these things. Oh, and if you don't like something, then don't use it. Or if you need something else, well, let me introduce you to setting rules or change the skills. Or there's 1,000 other things. I'm like, if you're playing a role-playing game and you feel the need to begin creating house rules, there's a problem with the game you're playing because it's not for you. And I think that's the hardest part to get across to people because it's like, what house rules do you use? Well, you shouldn't be playing that game. Not at all. But I enjoy it. You enjoy it because you changed it.
That's very fair.
I enjoy my Volkswagen now too because I bought an Excursion. So sorry.
It's a good thing you had your Excursion too because I don't think you would have fit in my car.
I barely fit in my Passat. That's why I bought the Excursion. I love that Excursion. The dogs love the Excursion, so instead of going to the lake.
I love my GTI.
Well, yeah, I still love Volkswagen, but I'm like, because Volkswagen make the Atlas, but the size of the Excursion, and then the Volkswagen people are just like, what? I'm like, yeah, bigger. Bigger with a V10 engine, because why would you want that? Because that V8 you got in there is not a real V8. Let's be honest. And that thing, it was all snowy and we had a good time driving it. Very few times I get to take a vehicle out and practice crash and bang, but there's always I look forward to heavy snows. Like, hey, you want to see what I learned in Virginia?
Nice.
Uh,
But
man. Good times.
we're heading about an
Did we crap all over
hour.
story games?
No,
All right,
honestly,
sorry.
I think the only thing we've kind of proved is that the line between story games and RPGs is almost a little pointless to make because they seem to blend
Yeah.
so much together that it's hard to
Yeah.
really say, oh, this is only a story game. This is only RPG. No, because they always take elements from each other. So maybe we
Yeah.
just got to call them RPGs.
So
Well,
one last thing.
I'm good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. So this might help. Story games are only good for one shots. I said what I said.
I don't disagree. Although I will say, if you come to me and say that you played a GM-less solo RPG, I'm going to rage quit on you.
No, I'm talking about Dread. We wouldn't
Yeah.
leave it. We wouldn't leave the Jenga tower up to continue the story of the surviving characters.
Yeah, agreed.
Right. Story games are basically one shots.
Well, and to that point, I mean, 10 Candles is totally that way because all characters die at the end of 10 Candles.
Yeah.
And what's that one about language?
Oh man, yeah, it's right in front of me, but I can't see the book.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, and it got moved on me, so.
I know it's the cards. If I only had the force, let me channel my hatred. Maybe it'll work. But yeah, it's what the hell is that game?
Yeah, you can't
But yeah,
stand up
it's
because
a
you're not wearing
one-shot
pants,
game.
right?
No, I could. I had to get used to that. That's what I did on the pandemic. Was fun because it was like, "Are you in uniform?" I had the top on. Yes. What is that?
The
game?
language, it's the language, dialect.
Dialect. It's a
Dialect.
great game, man. We should play that one time on stream just to do it.
Dialect?
I would love to play that game. I've never played
It'd be
it.
fun. No, it's a
And-
GM-less game though. You have a problem with it.
Oh, no.
But we've already established on an RPG.
Yeah, and
It's
we
not.
got to
It's
we got to get Finder to buy also Celastra, and then we can do that one on stream too.
And then he'd be like, "Oh, you know what's really cool? Computer role-playing game."
Yeah, I've never really
Look
touched him before, and I think I was wrong on complaining about him all this time. I might try this solo RPG.
Look at him talking about his character on Solastra.
Oh, hey, yeah. You know what, guys? I got something here for you.
That was good. That was awesome.
That'd be perfect.
Oh yeah. But yeah, no, I agree with you, Scott. I think they're good for mostly only one shots. And now I say mostly because I think
Mhm.
I wouldn't say it's only one shots, just because I think you could have 2 or 3 sessions, but it has to be a self-contained story. It has to
Yeah, you're not
involve-
going like.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, you're not going to play like Lost Minds of Fandelver in Dread.
Yeah.
Or what other story, yeah.
Yeah, like
It's not gonna happen.
even with what I was talking about, Heart, they say this should be only 3 sessions, 5 max, and that's what they run with, because they say it's like there's a good chance you guys are going to die, but the game isn't about becoming the best, the strongest. It's about creating a story revolving around your group. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm glad someone agrees with me. So that's good.
No, I agree.
No, I mean officially, it's nice to hear someone. It's nice to hear a publisher be like, "I'm going to be honest with you. Don't play Rhyme of the Frost Maiden in Heart." Like, oh, but what about Dungeon World? Yeah, I would totally. Oh man, that gives me a really good idea. Anybody out there want to play Lost Minds of Fandelver in Dungeon World?
Now we got.
If you're running it, I will play it. I mean, I've got no problems doing that. So
I got so much in my.
I've got trust in you as a GM. So
that's the problem. So what we talk about when we write when I write stuff. My buddy says the same. It was that's the conversation we have. Is like we go to the convention or we're running stuff, and it's like, hey, how did you like the game? And people are like, oh, this is a really fun game. The thing. And I know that people listening are like, this motherfucker has such an ego. I'm like, I don't have an ego. I don't think I run games well. I just have charisma and actual charisma, and it allows me to be a spaz and a hype at the table. But the thing is like, was the game fun? Like, oh, it was great. I love the setting. And like, did you? And then my boy is like, now, do they really like the setting, or is it because you ran the game? I was like, yeah, I know. I need to see someone run the game who's not me and be like, run the game. You know, and they just sit on my hands and vibrate through time and space and not try to interject. That's gonna be hard. That'll be hard in the West March to be like, oh, here's where it is on the map. You're dumb. But yeah, no, I got a lot on my plate. But I do want to. Let's commit. I do want to run in this year before I get reassigned and my life turns upside down. I do want to run you guys through a one shot of Rollmaster and 4E. I'll commit to that. And then Santa has to commit to running. You got to run a one shot for is in not Lilliput, but Low Life. Whatever.
Low Life? Yeah, I know.
Low Life, yes. Just
we'll
you make shit up. I don't really care. I want to play a Twinkie Man with a toothpick.
And we'll run it using Fate.
So here's.
I want to be a Twinkie Man.
Okay, I'd say we play a game of Low Life that's Deadlands though. So it's like you're not just a Twinkie Man, you're Twinkie the Kid.
Oh, no, well, yes, but I could be Twinkie the Kid, the huckster. Oh my god!
Exactly.
So combining Deadlands with Low Life, I can do that.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Oh my god! I'll be your cream filling.
Someone's just got to clip that part right there.
No, that's the race.
Rich.
Sorry, the ancestry.
I think isn't it Cremphillian or something like that?
Cremphillian.
Yeah.
It's a Twinkie Man.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest with you. The drawing is a Twinkie Man. He's a rugged Twinkie Man. But
don't
Rich,
don't demonetize us, YouTube. We are.
You may have made Dungeon or Deadlands interesting.
Well, I remember my campaign that I was talking about too was actually a Western style game. Already,
awesome. Oh
it was already a Western style game. I could so easily do.
LOL. Siri agrees.
That was perfect timing. But on that note, folks.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. On that note, folks, that's all the time we had for today. I hope you enjoyed yourself. You can either comment if you're watching this on YouTube down below. You can send me an email at rpsmartpeople@gmail.com, or if Twitter's still around, you can send me a tweet at Twitter at rpsmartpeople. And that's all the time we have for today, folks, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.